Good evening. Today we meet to discuss one of the most important topics, in my view, the role of young people or the youth. But I'm going to wait for a few more people to join before we kick this off. And I'll make sure that we balance this right. In other words, I will not talk for too long before we get into a question and answer session, so that we address the things that are top of mind for you rather than me going on about what I think. But let me give a few more people to join us. Sawubona Willard and Annette in Blawayo, I see you've joined. Sonke Senda Bebe, welcome. Annette, yes, Dr. Bongiwe, welcome. You know what? I think we should kick off the conversation. Clearly, as usual, people will join us as we go along. As I said, I believe that the whole discussion about the participation of young people in politics is one of the most important things we could discuss. But where I want to start off is typically when we discuss the politics of our continent and Zimbabwe as well, included in that, we'll tend to hear about underdevelopment, we tend to hear about corruption, we'll tend to hear about bad governance, the state of the infrastructure, health services, education, and so on and so on. I want to frame our conversation tonight for us all to understand that the one common denominator in all of these things is leadership. So if you wanted to put your finger on what it is, that would be a lever which, if you pulled right, would put all of these characteristics that we typically identify, put them all right, it would have to be the quality of your leadership. And again, allow me to digress a little bit. I'm not quite sure how many of you listening tonight are aware that China, which we all again accept as a successful country, has made a deliberate and concerted effort to get managers of anything that is significant in China to be predominantly people who've either studied natural sciences or engineering. And of course, there are economists among these people, but predominantly it's natural scientists, engineering, and some economists. If you go to Europe similarly, I remember doing this even in my PhD. If you contrasted the behavior and the way the Germans choose their leaders across a whole range of things, across the board, and contrast that with the way leaders tend to be chosen and rise to the top in a country like England, there are some fascinating differences. The Germans, in the first instance, you find that a lot of their top leadership is got postgraduate qualifications. And secondly, you will also find that there is a preponderance of engineers and natural scientists. Unlike the UK, where it tends to be Oxbridge, people who've studied geology, history, all sorts of things. I'm not making a judgment, I'm just pointing out these things. The reason why it's important to keep this at the back of our minds is that I think all of us would agree that China and Germany, at least as of today, run very successful economies. And I think, therefore, it is not unreasonable to begin to try and analyze and try to understand how these countries are doing what they're doing and why they're deciding to choose leaders who come from particular disciplines. In case you were not aware, Angela Merkel, for instance, is a PhD in physics. So I think that is interesting. And like I said, the Chinese leadership of today are primarily natural scientists and engineers and economists. Now, why is this important? And what is its relevance to the involvement of young people in politics and the leadership issue? So we know that in terms of demographics on our continent, globally actually, but much more so on the African continent, young people are in a huge majority in those demographics. Somewhere between 6 and 70% of our populations are young people, which means, therefore, the whole exercise of choosing leaders through an electoral process should be predominantly overwhelmed by what young people choose to do. That's if they choose to participate. So if you want to be provocative, you could almost like say everything that's going wrong on the continent is their fault, whether they choose to participate and how they participate. So choose to participate, the quality of that participation. How do you choose who is going to lead your country? What do you consider? So I've given you 2 nations that we will all agree are successful, and I've given you some of the characteristics they consider in choosing their leaders. I've also now pointed out for you that the demographics of our continent tell us that the quality and the outcome of every single African election can be determined by what young people do. We, this year, are facing an election, and we will listen to all kinds of debates and all sorts of promises. I want to suggest to young people, and I hope that the majority of people who are going to be listening to me tonight or engaging actually in this conversation are going to be young people. I want to suggest, therefore, that the future of this country, as we stand on the threshold of an election, is literally in the hands or on the shoulders of the young people. What you're going to choose to do will determine whether this country is going to be led appropriately or not. And I also want to suggest that we should not get emotional about this. We should be cold-bloodedly rational and also use examples of other countries and how they're doing what they're doing. So if we want to succeed, that is really the debate. Young people are the majority. Other nations choose their leaders in a particular way. They've got an inclination to favor certain characteristics, and those characteristics I've chosen 2 very successful nations where nobody can dispute that: natural science, engineering, economics, and often at postgraduate level. Now, what are we going to do? I want us to have a conversation, and today I want it to be a conversation. I want to hear what you think about this framing. So I would open it up very early on for this conversation because I want to hear your own views and your own observations. And let's be very empirical. What do I mean by that? Or fact-based. Let's look at what happens around the world around us. Let's not just be closed in and look at our own situation, but let's try to learn. Successful people, how are they doing it? Could we, if we began to emulate some of the ways in which they do this, be equally successful? As we approach our elections, what are we going to do? So, open for any of your questions and contributions and your own thoughts. Patience Ndlovu wants to hear me saying something in Sindebele. Kunjani Patience? Uchona njani? I don't see any questions as yet. People are just agreeing with my framing, or that it's an interesting way of looking at things. But let's have a conversation. Let's discuss these things as we prepare ourselves for the coming elections. Cornelius has asked a question. Why do I think that participation by young people in Zimbabwe has been so low? To be honest with you, I suppose at one level, a lot of young people argue that their perception is that their vote counts for nothing. Because of the perception of rigging that takes place. They say the result of the elections is predetermined. What we do or don't do does not count. So maybe let me add to my framing about the demographics. I believe that if young people understood the superiority of their numbers, firstly, they would make sure that they all register to vote, and that as many of them therefore cast their vote, and that the vote is a reflection of their numbers and what they think is important, and in the choice of their assessment of what a leader is. The second issue we need to take on board is that when you look globally, we should not be idealistic in a very sort of almost like naive way. Wherever there is human competition, there is an inclination by those who've got the upper hand to cheat. And I'm using that word very precisely. So let me give you an example. We've got something like the Olympics. And at the Olympics, as you will all know, there is a lot of doping scandals. Now, this is supposed to be one of the most hallowed grounds, if you like, in terms of competition and therefore personality and behavior and the like. But I use that just to illustrate that we should not be naive in expecting the best behavior out of human beings. When there is pressure to win, then people tend to resort to all sorts of tricks to try and improve their chances of winning, right? If we therefore understand that, it means we've got an obligation to figure out how not to let the other side get the better of us. The first component is let's go and vote in huge numbers. What that does is that the rigging mechanics themselves are then hard put to it to come out with a result that is manipulated. Just numbers will tend to overwhelm whatever method is being used. That's the first point. The second very important point, though, is that young people, because of their numbers, if they understood this issue, they would then invest their time and energy in protecting the vote. In other words, you then have to have lots of volunteers who are going to be election agents to make sure that the observation of process of counting is never left unattended. And you should not be expecting to be paid for it. When you understand what is at stake and that your life literally is at stake, then all of you ought to be clubbing together and working in relays to protect the vote. Firstly, vote in huge numbers, and secondly, protect the vote. So there is nothing that the system other than violence. Well, of course, if the system then deploys violence like using state institutions like police and the army, the chances are that in the short to medium term, you lose. But I think history also tells us that there is no regime anywhere in the world that has succeeded in keeping the voice of its people oppressed forever. It does not exist anywhere in the world. So I think once you are aware of these dynamics, you will be disappointed, yes, in terms of when you look at history, but you'll also be encouraged by the fact that there is no evidence anywhere in the world where that kind of approach of suppression of the people's voice has succeeded forever. So that's the way to look at this. How can Rurama is asking a question about, it's a question about trading. I actually would like us to stay to the youth agenda. That's the issue of economic integration and so on. We'll have another session, which is what Rurama was asking about in terms of competitiveness on the African continent. I want us today to be very disciplined and focused on youth participation, because I believe that this is a pivotal issue. The outcome of the elections this year, if young people begin to understand how important this is, will be determined by you. So please, let's be disciplined and stick to this so that we all have enough time to understand just how important this is. Cornelius is asking me how APA can help young people to achieve some of this. This conversation is an APA conversation to make young people aware. So this very conversation is meant to help you take ownership of this agenda. So there is nothing that's going to be more important than this conversation to help young people take hold of this issue and run with it. So that's exactly what we're doing. It sounds like it's all clear and understood, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of questions. I'm a bit surprised, I must be honest. Firstly, I put on the table the issue of countries like China and Germany. Are there any questions on my using those examples? Or are we all clear that these are successful countries? And are we happy to look at how they've done, how they're doing their selection of leadership? Begilizo is asking whether Beijing is the best model. You know what? I am looking at successful economies. And therefore, and that's why I picked on China and I picked on Germany. It's across the board. You can go and look at Singapore if you like. I think you'll find very similar issues. What comes across is that meritocracy really counts. But meritocracy meaning what? Some of you know that I often use the example of, if you have got a house and your plumbing goes wrong, it's no good going to get an electrical engineer or electrician to fix plumbing, and vice versa. So we need to really begin to understand the importance of matching the job that needs to be done and the qualification of the technician who is supposed to execute on that job. If my lights or my lighting system goes down, I look for an electrician. If my plumbing goes down, I look for a plumber. It appears to me that we in this country and on the African continent as a whole are not paying attention to this. That's why I use Beijing, if you like, as you say, as an example. But I've also used Germany as an example. Now I've added Singapore as another example. And I think we need to interrogate this and see how to apply it to our country in the elections that are coming up. Livingstone is challenging me, saying I'm using examples of things that fit my narrative. I invite you to give me examples that don't. So this is a conversation. Feel free. Don't be constrained. So tell me what examples you want to use, which are equally competitive with the countries that we've just said. So just use a ranking of competitiveness and performance, and let's have the conversation. I notice quite a few questions keep coming back to the upper issue. One of the things that we in upper are trying to do is to make citizens of this country take ownership of the agenda. It is, political parties are an agglomeration, if you like, a gathering of citizens, individual people. So at the end of the day, for any political party to begin to have a handle on these issues, it has to have individuals who firstly understand the need to participate, and secondly, understand the need to personalize the responsibility. A party is an entity that is composed of individuals. So this conversation should go down, all the way down to individual responsibility. You and I asking ourselves, not hiding behind a party, saying, I, Nkosana, what am I going to do? What can I do? Not what can APA do. What is APA? APA is individuals. So let's not duck the question. What are we as individuals going to take away from this? That's what it's going to come down to. Livingstone has asked a question without telling me which particular country is asking about. When was the last time they had a president who was either an economist or physicist? Which countries? Angela Merkel for the past, since what, 2005? Is led Germany and she's a physicist. And the people who've been leading China are engineers as far as I'm aware. So there is somebody, let's see, Tinashe Muradzikwa asking about APA joining other parties. Ladies and gentlemen, this is part of our issue, I think. Let's try and be focused on I'm discussing this not even as APA, just as a citizen with other citizens. Let's engage on the substance of the conversation. Young people are the majority in this country. Whether you vote for APA or not, to be honest with you, is irrelevant for this conversation. All I want you to take away is an understanding that your numbers put you in the driver's seat and to accept the responsibility of making that count. Whoever you vote for, that's your choice, that's your right. But do you really understand that you as young people together can absolutely determine what's going to happen in this country? And then take ownership of that result. Whether you support APA or not is irrelevant. Just use your vote. If you don't believe that APA provides you with the answer of what is required, don't worry about the argument of who APA is working with. Just don't vote for us. It's as simple as that. A very important question that Wilkes is asking. Do we believe that we need a strong opposition in Zim? I think that opposition politics is a very important component of keeping a constructive tension in a system. Contestation improves the quality of delivery if it's properly managed and handled. And therefore, absolutely, my view is that we need a strong opposition, but how we get to that strong opposition is not a question of numbers only. It has to be to include significantly the quality of that opposition. What is the substance? You need to look at Zimbabwean political parties, African political parties for that matter, and begin to analyze them according to what they stand for, and see whether in fact they stand for anything different or whether they are just personality driven. But if you get to a point where there is really substance behind the political parties, then contestation, in my opinion, is a very healthy issue in a society. You need to be able to, in a loyal to the country approach, be able to question and examine and push back to make the other side think smarter and think more carefully about what they do and intend to do. Well, Tapua is raising a rather challenging question. He says the vote that counts in Zimbabwe is mostly among the uneducated youth. I don't think it matters too much about whether you're educated or not. At the moment, the truth of the matter is, educated or uneducated, people are selling airtime when they've got degrees. So educated and uneducated youth are all in the same space, where investment in education, spending years training, is producing no result because you don't have a job. So I actually think that young people can come together and define the kind of economy that will work for all of them. The level of education will simply determine what kind of job you get, but at least there will be jobs in the economy to suit your own training. If you are technically qualified, you get jobs that are appropriate. If you are not, or you've got academic qualifications, you might go into teaching, whatever. But I think the key issue, what unites all young people, is that opportunities for all of them, educated or uneducated, have disappeared. And therefore, I think you need to engage amongst yourselves in a consultative process, and which helps you to create convergence in action, to therefore use your numbers to determine who you are going to work with, who you believe will help to unblock this job opportunity space. Wilkes is following on about, we seem to worry about winning parties and always leave ourselves to strong critique of government. Absolutely correct. I think we need to let me give you an example. If you look at South Africa today, the EFF has totally changed the way politics are done in South Africa. They are not in government. They are not running any government. I mean, they've joined up in some of the urban areas in terms of local government. But on the whole, the quality of politics in South Africa is literally, it's taken a step improvement because of the presence of the EFF led by Malema, because of that tension and contestation and the very close scrutiny of what the ruling party is doing. So I couldn't agree with you more that if we want the governance in our country to improve, we need to understand that there is value in just being an opposition party, not only in being a ruling party. But that, in fact, there is, in many ways, the value that comes through a ruling party improves if there is a strong opposition party that keeps them under scrutiny. That's the way it works. You know, I am also there is a gentleman here, Wilfred, who is asking about political parties and lack of substance and upper ideology. I do not know how to make this clearer. I want the conversation tonight to be about the youth role in politics. Party or no party, a lot of people who actually vote are not members of any political party. If you contrast numbers anywhere in the world, what we call supporters on the occasion, people who go and decide to vote either way, are more than the people who call themselves members of a political party. So let's not get hung up about who is a member of what political party. Let's understand the responsibility that we carry simply as citizens who take our voting responsibility seriously. I may not belong to any political party, but if I understand my role and responsibility as a citizen, I'll turn up and vote. And at every election, I'll look at what is on offer and I'll make up my mind accordingly. So let's have this conversation outside of any political party issues. Let's look at the decisions we have to make as the choices as citizens of a country and participating in the choice of the people who are going to lead us in the next period of 5 years. That's all this conversation should be about. I'm not discussing ZANU, I'm not discussing MDC, I'm not discussing APA. I'm discussing the role of young people in politics. And when I say that, I don't mean as members of a party. I mean as citizens who vote and how they exercise that vote. And their understanding of the levers that they've got, which they can use to determine the trajectory that this country follows. Vulindlela is arguing that political parties have divided our people. That is true, but I continue to believe that Zimbabweans are smart enough to see through this. And again, this sounds to me like passing on the responsibility to somebody else. I am inviting us as citizens to begin to examine what is going on. And as you observe Vulindlela, I observe the same, you observe that. Talk to people, talk to the people that you influence, your friends and family, and make them aware of this issue and engage them to begin to make their decisions differently as they vote. I think we can do this. Let's not get held back by what other people are doing. Let's ask ourselves how we can beat the system which has put us in this bad place. Let's take ownership. Let's take responsibility. We can do it. A very important observation by Michaela. Agree with the points and making an observation that young qualified people are leaving the country in droves. Again, the reason why they are leaving in droves is because this economy is not providing them with any opportunities. I am, however, trying to point out that the same young people have got an opportunity to make their awareness count through how they mobilize each other and vote and decide who runs this country. I don't think we can run away from this issue. We are observing what is going on as a consequence. True. Therefore, the question is, what are the majority in this country going to do? And that majority at one level is defined by age, i.e. the youth. The youth have got it because of their numbers to be able to determine the quality of our elections. That is what I want us to engage with. The consequences of us selecting or electing the wrong people who then destroy our economy and provide no opportunities, which then results in people running away, it's a consequence. How do we stop it? We stop it by voting for the correct leadership to change all of that dynamic. Mtloli sees Mahlangu is say people don't vote according to substance. I am saying let's challenge ourselves to confront that issue. We can't just say this is what happens and not invest in trying to change it. I think we owe it to ourselves and our country to challenge this. Yes, that's how things are being done, but why don't we engage and try to get that changed? If all of us went out there and talked to the people listening to me tonight, if all of you went and talked to 10 people and convinced them to in turn talk to another 10 people, how long do you think it would take before we had a majority who understood we have to change our behavior? I don't think it will take that long. But if we keep saying, throw our arms up in the air and say that's not the way it happens, of course that's not the way it's being done up to date. I'm saying let us change it. I believe we can change it. That's what this conversation should be. We know what is going on. We know it's producing the wrong results. We've got the numbers who, if we engaged and convinced, would get this changed. Let's do that. Let's talk to them. Let's convince them and get them to behave differently and choose on substance rather than what they've been doing to date. And if we do that, this country will change. I can guarantee you. We will begin to feel the change within a couple of years. It will change. There is nothing that is other nations have got that is exceptional. Look at a country like Rwanda, which went through a genocide, and look where it is today. I do not know how many of you have been to Kigali. It's an amazing city, amazing country. Like I said, take examples like Malaysia, Singapore, Japan. You go to most of the Asian countries and where they've come from in the last 20, 30 years or so, it's unrecognizable. Do you think that we don't have what it takes like they do? I believe that we've got what it takes. We just have to engage in these debates and confront behaviors that are producing these bad results and change them. And if we do, in the next 10 years, Zimbabwe will be an example that people will come to look at and say, wow, they did it. Because it's not impossible. You see, Wendy is jumping to what will we offer. Please indulge me. I want us to engage in this conversation. Do we personally take responsibility for how we are going to vote? I think this question about what are you going to offer should be a question that is asked of all of the political leaders and all of the parties. But are we going to vote? All of us. Are young people in particular going to vote? But when your question is relevant, because once they decide they are going to vote, then the quality of their vote is going to depend on them interrogating every single political party and its leadership using your question. What are you going to do? But when you ask that question, don't get into a trap. Because I keep telling people as I go around the country that electioneering tends to produce very similar offerings in terms of how they are verbalized. People will campaign and promise you the same thing. They'll write a manifesto, and most of them, I can guarantee you right now, are going to be very similar. And so you have to go beyond the answers you are given. And the next thing I think the only thing that never lies to you is track record. In other words, all of these people who promise you all these good things, what is it that they've done in their lives before that would indicate that they are capable of doing what they are promising? It is the only thing that will tell you the truth. What is the track record? What have they done before? What kind of job have they held? What expertise has been recognized by other organizations in these individuals? Only that track record will become a good indicator of what they are likely to be able to do in the future. And so when people come and promise you the earth or the moon, please understand that everybody more or less is going to do the same. Ask them to tell you about history. What have you achieved in your life? What have you been able to do? Who else recognizes that you would be able to do this? What in your CV or track record speaks to your capacity to deliver? Philip Sibanda is pointing out that our rural areas have never been improved. I understand that. That's why I said, you know, we tend to talk about symptoms or outcomes of something. When we talk about lack of development, we talk about crumbling infrastructure, we talk about bad governance, we talk about corruption. All of these things, I'm arguing, come down to one thing and one thing only. Who are the leaders? And why do we choose them? All of these other things will never be solved until we resolve to choose the right people to lead this country. And I'm arguing for tonight that the youth, because of their numbers in our demographic, have got the answer to this. They've got the solution. If they use their numbers and their intellect to be very clear about what they want done, what job do they want to be done, and what kind of person can deliver on that job, then all of this will be history. Vincent is making an interesting observation. He argues that the youth in Zimbabwe know only potholes, power outages, bribes, system malfunctions, bank queues, inflation, etc., and that they've got no reference points. I think yes and no. You know, I think the media generally, broadly speaking, is brought to your house through the handset and access to what is happening elsewhere in the world. I think most people in Zimbabwe have got access visually to what happens elsewhere in the world, and therefore they've got access to what is possible. I accept that in their short lives, all they've ever experienced is the mismanagement of this country. But I think they do have a reference point of what could be. And I'm trying to make them understand tonight and that the common denominator, the only thing that is going to take you there is the correct kind of leadership. Without the correct kind of leadership, I can guarantee you it will never happen, no matter the resources we have. You know, again, we need to inform ourselves. When you take countries like Japan and contrast them to countries, Japan, Singapore, a city-state like Singapore, Japan, no resources other than maybe the sea, if you like. And on the other hand, we, weather-wise, natural resources-wise, our endowments are unbelievable. The difference comes down to how a leadership understands the topmost resource that counts, human beings, and how you prepare them for contributing to the economy through education, training generally, and the like. But the starting point, I go back, there is no way of getting around this issue. The starting point has to be the leadership you choose. The leadership we choose will then guide this nation through the necessary steps to deliver on what is desirable by everybody. If we keep not paying attention to who leads our country, we will never get out of this bind. So we'll continue to know potholes. We'll continue to, you know, just go to there is a picture that tells all of this. I don't know how many of you have seen it, where there is Salisbury, which has got paved roads and omnibuses, and then there is Harare, with no buses anywhere in sight, and all the roads completely potholed. It's possible to go back to something that looks like Salisbury. Not Salisbury, we don't want Salisbury, but in terms of how our country is run, if we choose the right people, we'll get it back and better even. Because now we've got more people who can participate and contribute as opposed to what Ian Smith was doing. That human resource contribution would make a huge difference in a very short space of time. But in order for us to do that, let's not get away from the point I'm trying to make tonight. We have got to take personal responsibility. I have to ask myself, what am I as Nkosana Moyo going to do about this? Not a question of pointing a finger at somebody else and saying, what are you going to do? What are you offering? That's not the answer. The answer is each one of us has to ask the question at a personal level. Starting tomorrow, how am I going to behave? What choices am I going to make? And what accountability do I put on my shoulders for delivering a result that is different from what we've experienced to date? Personalize it. Or Philip is asking what the topic is. The topic is essentially, I want to discuss youth participation in getting Zimbabwe to move on. Youth participation, the reason why I chose youth participation is because in terms of demographics, you all know that our populations on the African continent are predominantly the youth. And voting being a majoritarian exercise, it means when you look at the composition of your population, you can ultimately reduce it to which group is the biggest. If they exercise their responsibility to vote, would essentially determine the outcome. The quality of leaders, the outcome of the win, who wins, and so on. And I'm arguing that young people hold the cards because of their numbers. Tinashe is making an observation that the politics of Zimbabwe have tended to be reduced to the liberation struggle. But maybe let me just deal with that issue the way I look at it. Depending on how old you are, if you were around and of a sufficiently mature age, when I say mature, sufficiently aware, I should change that, sufficiently aware, you would know that almost all Zimbabwean families participated in the armed struggle. The only thing we can debate is different roles. The freedom fighters were able to move around this country, and they were able to get fed by ordinary families in this country. So there were different ways of contributing to the struggle. Therefore, logically, there should be nobody who says, unless a particular family or individual was an outright spy working for the whites to suppress other blacks. But when you look at it, the majority of our people participated in the liberation struggle. People's families got killed. Individuals from families went and left school and went to the war. I lost a sister. My brother joined the war. I personally didn't, but all families, I'm arguing, participated. That's point number one. So there should be no basis for saying we did this and others didn't and therefore we deserve. I think that's a mistaken way to look at the liberation struggle. Also importantly, let me use the example of a relay race. A relay race typically has got 4 runners. Each one of them hands over a baton when they've done their bit, the leg of the race. I would like for us as a nation to begin to think this way. The liberation struggle was a huge contribution to the evolution of this society, not to be minimized. But the liberation struggle was like a particular leg of a relay race. After that was done, the baton had to be handed over to a different skill set. After independence, we needed to now build our country, not to fight, but to build our country. And those of you who understand a bit of history, if you go to the UK, there is a gentleman who is quoted forever, or is used as an example, Churchill. Churchill led the British through a successful war effort. After the war, he stood for elections wanting to be prime minister, and he was not voted for because there was an awareness that his skills as a soldier or a general were not the same skills required to build a nation. If we understood this, we would move on to a different set of skills without seeking to diminish the contribution made by people who fought for liberation. These things are complementary, and it should be a baton that is handed over to a different generation, different skills, and therefore there should be no debate about we did this and therefore we should stay. We did this and we were very good at it. We were competent at it. Now our country requires a different set of skills. So let's look for different people. Like I use my example. Yesterday, I had a plumbing problem. I got a first-class plumber who fixed the job. 6 months down the line, my electrical system goes. I don't go back to the plumber. I look for an electrician. Different skill set. Does that mean the plumber did not do a good job? No, it doesn't mean that at all. The plumber did the job they were qualified to do and did it well. But now what needs fixing is different. So I have to look for somebody who has got that skill set to do the job I need to be done today. That's how we need to think. Shepard is asking whether I'm confident that in my role as president, I would allow the country to thrive for everybody. The answer is that's exactly what I would like to do. You know, I think that what I am doing, I have to say you believe or don't believe. That's why I kept going on about look at history. I was invited into President Mugabe's cabinet. A lot of people up to today do not understand how one could walk away from that position because their perception is that becoming a member of the cabinet, being a minister, is personalized. You look at it through what you can do, what you can get personal in your family. I've never looked at life that way. I am able to live my life successfully in the private sector, and I've done so. I am offering my services to my nation because I think I can contribute and make a huge difference. Just so we are very clear, am I saying I'm the only person who can do this? The answer is absolutely not. The only issue, though, is that I am one of a few people who've offered themselves to do this. I am almost certain that there are many, many more Zimbabweans who are even better than me, who just for whatever reason have chosen not to offer themselves to do this. I've done so. And the challenge that citizens have today is to choose from those who've offered themselves to do this job, to try to discern from the track record of these people, including myself, who you think as a citizen would execute that promise as closest to that promise and potential as possible. And I'm also arguing that the only guide you have is the track record of what they've done before. It's the only thing that will get close to allowing you to make a judgment of whether the promises that are being made are likely to be delivered on by looking at what those individuals have been able to do previously in their lives. Okay, so Rukudzo is asking a very important question. I think this issue about youth jobs or employment is actually misframed. You are absolutely right. The issue at hand here is that young people are not getting opportunities to become economically engaged and be able to support both themselves and their potential families. But this does not necessarily mean being employed. In fact, a big component of this conversation that has not yet happened is entrepreneurship and what that means, what that might look like. But so, because people who work in companies that have been formed by entrepreneurs, and therefore for us, we need to look at the foundational issue is what kind of education are we giving our young people? Are we including artisanal and technical training as opposed to just academic streams? People who go into academic training tend to become either teachers, doctors, professionals like that. But I have to tell you, when you observe globally, their risk appetite for doing entrepreneurship is much lower than people who go into technical training, artisanal training. Those are the people who we should be asking ourselves, how are we going to support them for them to create the jobs that we are talking about? Somebody has to create the jobs. We can't all say we want to be employees. That wouldn't work. So we have to look at both. We need people who are going to work, that is true. How do we prepare them for employment? What kind of training should they get which will make them employable? But in order for those jobs to come about, there have to be another group of people who are entrepreneurs. And what kind of support systems, first starting with education and then over and above that, how are we going to support them on their journey of entrepreneurship? So let me give you a couple of examples. I think one of the absolute key components about entrepreneurship is that we need to look at the availability of capital. Because if you imagine a young person studying engineering and then coming up with an innovation, a gadget they want to manufacture for a particular use, where are they going to get the capital to get that done? So we need, as a nation, to be thinking about how we're going to make capital available to support the entrepreneurs who in turn will then make jobs available for the others who choose to be employees. So yes, your framing of the question is absolutely correct, that employment is only a part component of what we're looking at. We need to look at how to support young people become entrepreneurs. We need to resource them with capital availability for them to be able to then to do what they need to do to employ other people. Wilfred, yeah, you're absolutely right. Being a head of state and being a head of a profit-making business are not the same thing. But I say it's up to you to make this judgment. I was hoping to avoid personalizing this. I've not only worked successfully as head of profitable organizations, I have supported entrepreneurs. As you know, Strive has written about it himself. Econet in many ways was nurtured in Standard Chartered Merchant Bank when I was running it. I have worked at the IFC in development finance. I've worked in Tunisia at ADB in development finance. I've also worked in private equity in London. When we're talking about making capital available, you need to understand it comes from having worked in all these institutions. That's exactly what I was doing. And I would like to argue that unless you've done those things, it's going to be very difficult for you to know how entrepreneurs get supported. It's going to be very difficult for you to be able to oversee even the investment by other people in your own country without literally selling down your assets down the drain and not properly valued. But it's up to us as citizens, guys. I am not forcing anybody to vote for me. I am much more interested in us engaging in an intelligent conversation about how we should do this. We can all agree we're not in a good place. And I think we need to take personal responsibility to understand why we are not in a good place. And therefore what we need to change in order to get a different result. That's all I'm saying. I have observed. Whether that leads you to vote for Nkosana and APA is a different debate. If you use this process and it leads you to vote for somebody else, be my guest. Just follow the process and be logical about it. And then we'll be, as a nation, if we do that, I think enough of us will make the right choice. So it's systems. You know, let me just give you a quotation from Bill Gates. Bill Gates argues that modernity is a miracle of systems. What I'm debating with you tonight is systems thinking. The way you do things has got certain consequential outcomes. So causality is an important issue. The decisions you make must be made in light of what you intend to achieve. And what you intend to achieve must guide you in terms of what you look for in the components of the processes that lead to those outcomes. That is systems thinking. We want a successful country. We cannot avoid having to think about what kind of leadership will lead us to a successful country. It's not avoidable. If I want to travel by air from here to London or New York, I need to look for an airline where they've got good pilots who know how to fly aeroplanes and navigate their way to take me to my destination. If I want to go from here to Bulawayo, either I drive myself properly or I get into somebody else's vehicle as a passenger, and that person has to know how to drive and how to navigate their way from here to Bulawayo. That's all I'm saying, guys. There is an objective, a destination. There is a way to get there. And the way to get there will include on what company you keep to get there. What person or people you allow to lead you to get there, and rather than lead you somewhere else. We are fortunate as a country. We've got the evidence right in front of us of decisions we've made which were not the right decisions. And we've got the results to show for it. So this debate should not be that difficult. We want a different result, which means the Zimbabwean economy is failing. We want a successful economy. We owe it to ourselves to examine what are the ingredients which would lead us to deliver a successful economy. We can use other countries' examples, as I've just done earlier on. There are examples of failed countries and there are examples of successful countries. What are the differences? What is it we can learn from those that succeed? What should we have learned from our own failure? How do we apply that experience or that knowledge? That is all I am suggesting we do. Oh, time has moved on. I hadn't realized. So, this for me is one of the most important conversations we should be having as a nation. Clarity about objectives and an acceptance that the choices we make will determine whether we achieve that objective or not. Clarity about the fact that in our population, in our demographic, young people are in the majority. Clarity about the fact that the whole voting process is a majoritarian process. The more people vote a particular way, the more likely you are to get a particular result. We want a good leader to lead us out of the situation we're in into a successful country and economy. Young people, as the majority amongst us, need to think seriously about how they get this country to begin to move into that space which is going to deliver value for themselves and their children and grandchildren. Let's leave it at that. This is not a conversation we finish in one day, but I hope that you'll take what we've discussed away and think it through and discuss it with your family and friends, as I always say. And once you discuss it with your family and friends, try to get them to do exactly the same. When we do that, we will cover the whole country. Everybody will engage in this conversation. And when we come to that vote, we'll have an opportunity to do something about determining the trajectory that our economy follows from that day onwards. Thank you very much and good night.